Welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast, a podcast dedicated to exploring the applied philosophy of traditional Stoicism. The College of Stoic Philosophers is an online school founded in 2008. We at the college endeavor to educate all who would be Stoics and Stoic philosophers who aspire to the good life within the world community. Podcast episodes will include discussions of Stoic history, application, interviews, and much more, all while having some fun, fate permitting. I'm your host, Mark Sterry. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. From May 23rd to 25th, 2025, members of the College of Stoic Philosophers faculty met in Athens, Greece. We toured the Acropolis and Parthenon, saw where the original Stoa was, enjoyed each other's company over Greek food and drink, and talked life and philosophy. Each faculty member was asked to give a presentation of their choice to the group. I chose the role of emulating the music archivist Alan Lomax and solely focused on field documenting these presentations. Picture inside a bungalow Airbnb, a wooden table covered with bottles of Greek Coca-Cola, wine, Greek beer selections, and open bags of oregano potato chips, surrounded by 8 practicing traditional Stoics, now friends. Like Lomax recording early folk music, not all audio survived the trip due to equipment malfunction and the cosmos just not allowing it. What you're about to hear is an edited portion of a faculty presentation in this environment while on an adventure of a lifetime. Without further ado, here's The Evolution of Schools in Antiquity by Mitch Leventhal.
Most of you probably don't know, I did my doctorate in comparative education, contemporary comparative education, looking at education systems around the world and so forth. And Eric knows when I was his student, I was very obsessed with the college as an institution, and Eric made a point to me that the aspirations of the college should last 500 years or so. I mean, they did it once before, and they were just human beings like us, and so why not? And so I've become very interested in sort of the history of schools in antiquity and what did things look like when these schools emerged and so forth. And so I did a little research on sort of the evolution of schools in antiquity, and I want to talk a little bit about that and position where the Hellenistic schools and the Stoa emerged, and then talk a little bit about what we know about how these schools operated. Because again, Eric, I hope I'm not assuming too much. I know you took your inspiration from the original Stoa and attempted to reconstitute it in a way that was fairly faithful in the modern context to what they were doing. So some of this may seem somewhat irrelevant, but we'll see. It appears that formal education didn't really begin until around 2500 BCE in Mesopotamia. And at that time, in cities like Ur and Nippur, they had these places called edubas, E-D-U-B-A-S, which translates as tablet houses. And these were training grounds for scribes and administrators, who were the most educated people, apart from priests and so forth at that time. And they were in close proximity to temple precincts and seemed to have both dual religious and bureaucratic functions. Students learned through rote repetition, copying text in cuneiform, and internalizing legal and literary formula that were used in the work that they did. They had very harsh discipline. Much of this is known from, well, all of it, from cuneiform writings. They left a gigantic amount of cuneiform behind. And if you go to the British Museum, you can see donkey receipts in cuneiform, and you can see warehouse inventories, and you can see letters from people and divorce decrees, and you name it. And there actually are tablets of students writing home and complaining to their parents about how miserable they are, and so forth. The discipline in these schools was apparently quite harsh, and the curriculum was very rigid because it served very specific functions. But that same model also was carried forward in other empires, the Akkadian Empire, the Assyrian Empire. And so the assumption is it was quite successful because it endured for a very, very long time in those societies. But there isn't much evidence of other kinds of schools. I mean, there may have been, certainly there was learning going on. Around that same time, though, in parallel in Egypt, they had their own educational practices. It was the schools were called the Per-Ankh, P-E-R, and second word A-N-K-H, Ankh, which translates as house of life. And some of you may have seen the Ankh symbol, which the Ankh, the Egyptian Ankh, which means life, which often you'll see like women wear an Ankh symbol, maybe men too. So they think that these schools existed around contemporaneously with the Sumerian edubas, the tablet houses. They were typically, in the case of Egypt, embedded within temple complexes. Instruction was centered on hieroglyphic literacy, ritual knowledge, and practical disciplines like astronomy and chemistry. So we know the Egyptians had a broader curriculum, apparently, than the Sumerians. Teachers were drawn from the priestly ranks. Enrollment was largely restricted to the sons of the elite. And some of the schools, particularly in Memphis and Thebes, remained active for centuries. So again, there seemed to be a really deep entwinement of education with sort of cultic religious practices and state activities. Around 1200 BC, in India, the Gurukulas emerged in Vedic India. That's G-U-R-U, Gurukulas, K-U-L-A-S, around 1200 BC. And a lot of this is actually new to me. As I was digging into it, I had never heard these terms before. These schools operated within hermitages, ashrams, essentially, where students, mainly Brahmin boys, lived with a guru and studied the Vedas, ritual law, and philosophy. It was an oral instruction technique and very intimate teaching environment in these communities, which set them apart from the temple-based system. So they were much more mentorship, small group kind of educational, intensive educational activities, primarily oral. And they emphasized discipline, hierarchy, and sacred knowledge. That was around 1200 BC. The next development in sort of schools seems to have happened around 750 BC in Israel. They had a scribal culture. The Jews were very obsessed with literacy, and everyone had to be able to read these scriptures versus having them strictly interpreted by a priest. And by the 8th century BCE, Jerusalem had become a hub for the study of Hebrew, the legal traditions, and the sacred scriptures. But it seems that these institutions lacked fixed campuses, but they provided a foundation for later rabbinical academies, and they played a critical role in shaping the textual coherence of what became the Hebrew Bible. Around 550 BC, switching back to India and China eastward, this is where schools seem to really become more formalized. So in South Asia, you saw centers of learning such as Taxila, which was a city which is located in present-day Pakistan, which was a cosmopolitan hub where disciplines such as grammar, medicine, logic, military science, and the Vedas were taught. It was based on individual instruction delivered by renowned teachers to students who traveled from all over the subcontinent and Central Asia. There wasn't really a central university, but it sort of functioned as a highly networked academic community, which marked a critical evolution from rural to urban forms of education. So in a sense, Taxila was attracting scholars from all over and just becoming a kind of a magnet for people who wanted to learn, much like Athens became with the sophists and so forth. Around that same time in China, the philosophical education was shaped by the moral vision under the Zhou dynasty, when private instruction in scholarly circles proliferated. Confucius welcomed students from all social strata, very egalitarian, unlike the temple schools, and developed a curriculum based on the 5 classics and moral cultivation. His egalitarian ethos and emphasis on virtue made Confucian schools enduringly influential. And there were also other thinkers like Mozi, for those of you who've heard of Moism, another ancient Chinese philosopher, who founded a competing school, and they promoted instruction in logic, frugality, and defensive strategy. I think that's an interesting combination. I'm not exactly sure how that worked, but defensive strategy is a field of study. It's interesting. It's not offensive strategy, it's defensive strategy. And the intellectual ferment later was called the 100 Schools of Thought by the Chinese, reflecting the intensity of different schools and the ferment that was happening during that period, the axial age. Around that same time, around the mid-6th century BCE, Sparta was a significant player in Greece. And they were somewhat distinctive because they had a state-controlled educational system that called the agoge. I don't know how that. Agoge. Which was a nationalized system of education for we know all men, but there probably was a parallel. There's parallel training for women as well, for girls. It was not oriented towards literacy or speculative thought, however, Spartans. It was really focused on military discipline, obedience, civic loyalty, and team effort, and things like that. Beginning at about the age of 7, boys were removed from their families and raised in communal barracks, where they underwent rigorous physical training, endurance exercise, and ritualized hardship. Reading and writing was minimally taught. The emphasis was on brevity of speech, which we know laconic speech is famous, martial prowess, and loyalty to the state. Education was really intended to serve the purposes of the state. Unlike most ancient educational systems, the agoge was universal for citizen males. It was state mandated. It was intensively collectivist. And while it didn't produce philosophers or it did not produce philosophers or administrators, it did cultivate a citizen soldier elite whose cohesion and discipline underpinned Sparta's military dominance for centuries. So the Spartan model continues to be a subject of fascination for utopian thinkers and so forth. But during that same period, and of course, a little bit more recently, Athens emerged then also. But it fused education with civic life, incorporating through fee-charging pre-Socratics and sophists such as Protagoras and Gorgias and others. Students learned rhetoric and ethics to prepare for democratic participation. Of course, they could choose who they studied with. It wasn't state mandated. There wasn't a state curriculum. And by the 4th century BCE, schools began to take permanent form. So Plato's Academy was founded in 387 BCE, and it offered sustained study in metaphysics, mathematics, and dialectics within a structured campus environment, complete with a gymnasium and library. Aristotle's Lyceum, which was founded 2 years later, around 335 BCE, emphasized empirical science, political theory, and systemic inquiry. And each institution reflected the philosophical commitments of its founder. The Stoic and Epicurean schools, which both emerged around 300 BCE, developed contrasting models. The Stoics, beginning with Zeno, taught in the Stoa Poikile, signaling their commitment to civic virtue and probably their wise choice not to invest in campus infrastructure. The Epicurus, on the other hand, purchased land and formed his garden, which was a more private and inclusive space that admitted women and slaves, and their emphasis was on tranquility, friendship, and atomist physics, and that set them apart both socially and intellectually from many of the others. Around that same time, in Alexandria, there was a fusion of Hellenistic and imperial learning. The Museion and its famous library, the library in Alexandria, supported by Ptolemaic rulers, resembled a research university. So scholars such as Eratosthenes and Aristarchus advanced mathematics, textual criticism, natural science, within an environment of generous patronage and scholarly autonomy in Alexandria. By about 200 BCE, Athens had emerged as an undisputed cosmopolitan center of philosophical education, and students came virtually from everywhere in the Hellenistic world. That period, from about 200 BCE to about 200 CE, saw the maturation of and institutional consolidation of these education systems that were developed in Greece. While philosophical schools continued, new forms emerged within imperial frameworks, linking education to political legitimacy and administrative control. So it appears that government became a lot more interested in what was going on in the schools and what was being taught in the schools. Athens continued its preeminence during that period, that 400-year stretch, though increasingly it became a kind of a finishing school for Roman elites, kind of like the Grand Tour. You're ready to go out as an adult, go to Athens, spend a year, and then you're going to enter life. The academy, the lyceum, and other schools adapted to new patronage models with formal lectures, salaried instructors, and libraries supplementing old mentorship-based methods. Moving forward a little bit, 50 CE, Musonius Rufus taught Stoicism in Rome, and unlike his Athenian predecessors, apart from the Stoics, he dispensed with physical campuses. And he emphasized virtue in daily life, aesthetic discipline, and advocated education of women, of course. And we know Epictetus subsequently was his student and founded his own school, which does appear to have been physically located in Nicopolis, where he emphasized philosophical life as a daily practice of self-examination and ethical training. So his school attracted Roman officials and provincial elites, and it provided a powerful model of character formation over intellectual display only. I have some other things here from a little bit later. I just want to go through just so we have the whole stretch. Roman education, around 70 CE, actually first in Israel, they actually started establishing rabbinical academies. So they did start setting up campuses at that point for religious study. In Rome, education became a lot more stratified in the Christian era. Grammar schools trained children in Latin and Greek, while rhetorical schools prepared young men for political careers. Quintilian's Instituto Oratorio laid out a full pedagogical vision from childhood moral development to adult oratorical excellence. And Quintilian's work reflected an ideal of education as moral cultivation in the service of public life. There was more development in Asia, of course, during this period as well. And just to mention, there was actually a university in Nalanda, India, that was set up around 100 to 200 CE. It was a Buddhist university. It's extremely interesting because the ruins still exist. It was established as a fully a large, fully residential university with dormitories, lecture halls, and a centralized administration. You look at the ruins, it looks like it could have been a modern university campus. And people traveled there from China, Tibet, Korea, Southeast Asia, all over. And their focus was on, they had an expansive curriculum apparently on logic, grammar, medicine, astronomy, and both Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, an emphasis on textual exegesis, public debate, and institutional continuity sparked a shift towards a pan-Asian model of higher education. So I just want to sort of put it in the context. Education was very much kind of in development. Like, what is education? What is a school? There wasn't really in Athens any kind of universal conception of what it could be or where it would go. But it does fit within a continuum. The one last thing I want to say about this chronology, and then I want to go into a couple of other things. In 125 CE, Emperor Hadrian, who was a lover of philosophy, visited Athens and became a patron of the Academy, the Lyceum, and the Stoa. He also, either on the way coming or going, visited Nicopolis and attended lectures of Epictetus. Following his visit, in his tour of all the major philosophical schools, he endowed the schools, the 4 major schools, with funds for scholarships, libraries, and gymnasia, which kind of makes you wonder what the Stoa did with their endowment. Perhaps they bought books and maybe they lodged the books in a public building or a temple. We don't really know. Maybe they used it to have meetings of their faculty on occasion, who were dispersed across Hellenistic world. We don't really know. But of course, Hadrian built a huge library that's not far from where we're sitting right now, which was used by all the schools. So by around 200 CE, the ancient world had a very rich tapestry of educational institutions of all types, which were adapted to local needs, oftentimes imperial priorities or particular philosophical visions. What began as training in temple scriptoria or forest hermitages had become sort of an empire-spanning system of civic, religious, and intellectual formation taking place in all sorts of different ways. And that's how it went until about 529 CE, when Emperor Justinian I decided to permanently close and destroy all of the schools and all of their books, except for a couple select choices. So I've got some references here, which I can share at some later point with people. But something that really has been a curiosity to me is what do we actually know about how these schools were run? I'm always wondering, how were they run? How did they make decisions? How did they divide up the tasks? Because one thing I've learned with this little school is, even a little school, there's a lot of logistics. Just collecting people together in one place and not having them wander off, there's a lot of logistics. So I did a little work into that to see what do we know. And of course, no administrative records survive, and the sources are really limited. So there's a lot of speculation here. But there do seem to be some differences between the 4 major schools that were in Athens. So I want to talk just a bit about that, and then I have one final thing. The academy was sort of focused on structured dialogues and intellectual stewardship. So it was founded in 387 BC in a sacred grove near Athens.
Was that by Plato? Or was that Plato?
Yeah, Plato's academy. And it became a model for institutionalized philosophical instruction. He emphasized dialectic, conducted through structured dialogues, and entrusted the leadership of the school, the scholarch, to successors such as, I'm going to mess this one up, Speusippus and Xenocrates.
Σπεύσιπος Xenocrates.
Yeah, and a lot of this, by the way, comes from Diogenes Laertius and Strabo, and again, there are a bunch of sources, but it's very, very fragmentary what we know about how they ran. The Academy likely maintained a library, of course, and a curriculum which was rooted in mathematics, ethics, and metaphysics. Those were sort of their major push. Day-to-day activities probably included scheduled lectures, private tutorials, ritual commemorations for Plato and the Muses, and meetings of students to practice philosophical argument. The scholarch would have overseen the general administration, including student admissions and financial affairs, supported by fees and aristocratic patronage. So they took donations, they charged fees, and there was, they had a campus, they had infrastructure to maintain, and so forth. Aristotle's Lyceum, emphasis, again, generalization, maybe more on empirical method and what you might call scholarly bureaucracy. So this one, founded in 335 BCE, expanded on the model of the Academy by adding empirical research and classification. Aristotle was really big into taxonomy and classification, natural philosophy. Morning lectures usually were for advanced students. Afternoon discussions were for general audiences. And that was standard and reported by Strabo and Plutarch. The Lyceum operated as a collective scholarly research institution. Aristotle directed research in fields ranging from zoology to political theory, with students or assistants helping to compile data, forming what is now considered maybe the earliest research institute, scientific research institute. Manuscript copying, archival maintenance, and correspondence with distant scholars likely required specialized administrative roles. People came, the world was big. People came to Athens and they went back. They stayed in contact. So there must have been an enormous amount of correspondence going on. Curriculum was a focus on logic, rhetoric, and natural philosophy in a very structured educational program, which we don't really have complete details of. And now the Stoa Poikile, philosophy in the public square. And of course, we know most of this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The Stoa Poikile, the painted colonnade in the Athenian Agora, was the original site of Zeno's teachings and the birthplace of Stoicism in around 300 BCE. Its public nature shaped its operations. Instruction was free, held in the open air, and aimed at a broad audience. According to Diogenes Laertius, Zeno, and later Chrysippus engaged students through public lectures and daily exercises in logic and ethics. Although the Stoics lacked a private campus or other facilities, they maintained a highly disciplined internal culture. Students were expected to practice daily ascesis, moral training through reflection, journaling, and self-restraint. I'm getting some of this from Long now. While formal bureaucratic structures are unlikely, there was a loose hierarchy, somehow based on seniority, philosophical competence, and administrative skills. We can only speculate that common property, such as books, would be held at a temple or a public library, some other such facility, because they didn't have their own. Then there was the garden. You might say that the major theme there was withdrawal, equality, and quiet instruction. So the garden, again, founded around the same time as the Stoa, was a counter model. It was situated outside of the gate, the Diplon gate, outside of the city walls. It served as a philosophical commune. Epicurus admitted women and slaves on equal terms with men, created a domestic and inclusive environment. Diogenes Laertius records that Epicurus left detailed instructions in his will for the garden's continued operations, including provisions for communal meals and celebrations. Instruction was centered on a canon of texts authored by Epicurus. The garden operated through shared labor, frugal living, and correspondence with distant Epicurean communities. This infrastructure contrasted with the Academy and Lyceum, but the Garden campus and close adherence to the guidelines sent out by Epicurus provided a highly stable form of ethical formation based on friendship, leisure, and tranquility. So just in summary, that despite their differences, these Hellenistic schools shared certain rhythms. They had scheduled instruction, daily ethical exercises, and reliance on a hierarchical leadership. The Academy and Lyceum cultivated extensive scholarly programs and physical facilities. The Stoa and Garden emphasized ethical lifestyle and accessibility. Philosophy in the Hellenistic world was both a public and a private affair, a mode of life requiring practical support, routine, and communal discipline. As these schools evolved, they laid the groundwork for institutional education across the Roman Empire and beyond. And, again, we see Musonius and Epictetus, very contrasting approaches, one no campus, one with a campus. Horses for courses, as my English friends say. Sometimes in one context, one might work better, in some another. So that's most of my presentation today. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I may not be able to answer them definitively. But
I have a question.
yes.
Our present universities, are they modeled after the Lyceum or the Academy or both?
I would say more closely to the Lyceum because of the emphasis on research as a core function of the school. Observational research.
I just know the university I went to, their sort of logo was like a tree, with, that made me think of the garden. Was that Plato's garden? Where
Sounds like the tree of knowledge to me.
Okay, well, I
Yeah,
it is like
yeah, the garden.
To that garden.
So now we'll get to the weird part. So after I did this, you all may know, a couple of years ago when the school was 15 years old, I felt like somehow the history of this school needs to be recorded so that future generations have some idea how this school, the College of Stoic Philosophers, started, and we need to not look like a flash in the pan or a very temporal thing. People need to know that we have traditions, we have a history, we have coherence. And so I wrote this sort of commemorative history, which is somewhere on the website. And when I finished putting this together, I thought, well, that's interesting. I'd like to use ChatGPT, I'm not a very good poet, to see, what I did was I uploaded the history of the College of Stoic Philosophers, and I uploaded this history of the schools, and I asked it to write a poem about the College of Stoic Philosophers. And to my astonishment, my wife was very upset with me. She thinks you shouldn't use AI for creative things, but I thought it's very good at rhyming words. It's incredible with language. So I put it in, and it came up with something called "To Eric Weigert, Founder of the College of Stoic Philosophers, an Ode in Honor and Reflection." So I'm going to read an ode to Eric Weigert, which was conceptualized sort of by me, but really done by AI. So this is what technology thinks of your work. Apologies to humans, but I'm going to read this. So this is quite interesting. Upon the porch where Zeno taught, beneath the colonnaded thought, a modern voice took up the thread, a Stoic path by reason led. Not in Athens' crowded square, nor cloisters hushed in scholars' air, but through the wires and quiet screens he kindled ancient deathless means. Where once the Eduba's clay was dried, and scribes by cuneiform were tied, where temple priests imper ankh trained, and Hebrew law through scrolls remained, where Spartan boys in silence grew, and forest gurus taught the few, where Taxila and Nalanda rose, and virtues bloomed in Han repose. There now a college took its shape, remote yet firm as granite cape. No cloistered walls, no marble dome, but thought's own hearth, its founder's home. Eric, with a craftsman's care, wove silence, study, daily air. He knew that Zeno had once seen, what Zeno had once seen, that wisdom walks where hearts are keen. He formed not soldiers clad in mail, nor scribes whose tales in time would pale, but minds attuned to nature's law, to joy in fate and virtue's awe. A faculty austere and kind, he gathered from the seeking mind, no fee for word, no flattering tone, but simple truth through logos shown. He offered not escape, but frame, the strength to greet both loss and blame, a college in the Stoic way, where soul and speech aligned each day. As Hadrian gave Athens light, endowing schools with Roman might, so Eric, with no coin or sword, endowed the world with self restored. Let others chase the fleeting prize. He built a home beneath the skies where seekers learn, endure, and grow in virtue's pace, serene and slow. And though the Stoa's stones may fade, the voice he raised, the path he laid, will echo in each student's breath, a gift unbroken, still past death. So thank ChatGPT for that. Apologies to my fellow humans. I take no credit except that I uploaded 2 things and it produced this. So I have a copy for you of that.
I hope you do. I definitely want to see
Well,
that.
here, take this whole thing.
Thank you for tuning in to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. Please visit the collegeofstoicphilosophers.org for information on the college, e-journal, and course offerings. Till next time, pro cop.